Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Kauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Shunyavadi Paskatya Desatarine. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare-rama, Hare-rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare-rama, Hare-rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare-rama, Hare-rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare-rama, Hare-rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare-rama, Hare-rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahangsa Brahmadakacharya Asadhara Sadushi Shriman His Divine Grace Shalasi Bhaktivedanta Swami Raj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Gaur Premanande Haribo Slava Zavrani Bhakta Slava Shri Guru Shri Grangi Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhute Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Tenamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vicharane Nirvishesha Srinivadi Paskatyade Satarne. Is the Harinam still out?
No. We just came.
What's that?
We just came.
I just came. Om Agyanatmanandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chaksur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutle Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Parakamalam Shri Gurum Devi Vaishnavam Scha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Prijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakan Svitamscha Hey Krishna Karna Sindho Dinabando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Prashubhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sinu Vyevacha Patidanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today is the disappearance day of His Divine Grace, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada Thakur Ki Jai. So generally speaking, on appearance days and disappearance days, we say something about the Acharya. Prabhupada didn't. Only one time I was in Boston in 1969 on this disappearance day occasion, and Prabhupada spent the whole lecture talking about Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. Unfortunately, it wasn't recorded. So in any case, Prabhupada rarely extensively talked about the Acharyas on their appearance or disappearance days, except for the fact that the Acharyas, as it says by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, that he reasons ill who thinks that Vaishnavas die, for thou art living still and sound, that Vaishnavas die to live, and living spread the holy name around. That as no one actually dies, because the soul is eternal, so what to speak of the Acharyas? The example is given, the sun at a certain time rises, and we can see it. And at another time, it sets and we can't see it. Previously, the Aborigine people used to think that the sun has been born, and now the sun has died in the evening. But actually, the sun is always there, but sometimes we can see it and sometimes we can't. Similarly, the Acharyas exist eternally, just as we're all eternal. But sometimes they make their appearance to our vision, and sometimes they disappear. But for the Acharyas, for those who are engaged in serving them through their instructions, the Acharyas exist in the form of sound. They exist in their sound vibration. So especially the Acharyas, our immediate Acharyas, especially those who are giving us the instructions of how to spread the Sankirtan movement, they still guide us personally through their instructions. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he specifically wanted to revive the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. At some time after the disappearance of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the Acharyas, for the most part, the Sankirtan movement practically disappeared. There were some Acharyas, but mostly they were living in a very secluded place. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Srila Baladev Vidyabhushan, Narottam Das Thakur. But even within India, there was a whole growth of a movement called the Sahajiyas, the Owls, the Bowels, the Kartavekis, the Sakibekis, the Garanganagaris, the Ativeshas. Basically, they had taken the philosophy of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and distorted it. And therefore, people in general in India, because outside of India it wasn't known, they took the Vaishnavas as a kind of a sect, a deviant sect. They didn't take it very seriously. Most of the people in India thought that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, if they knew of him at all, was just some devotee of Krishna. But Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he tried to revive the movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at the time when he became a devotee. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, of course, he's eternally a devotee, but when he manifests himself as a devotee, he was looking for a Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he couldn't even find one in India. He couldn't even find a copy of it. But somehow or another he got a copy, and he started to expand the Sankirtan movement through the process of Namhata. And he saw that considering the age of Kali, how degraded it is, that unless there was an acharya, a great devotee. Of course, many of Bhaktivinoda Thakur's children were devotees, some of them of some great stature, but still he didn't see anyone who's qualified to carry on the movement after his disappearance. So he prayed that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would send him a great devotee from his associates to help him carry on the movement. So it is said that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was born, and they took it as an indication that he was born with his umbilical cord around his neck like a sacred thread. I guess they took that as a sign. Of course, other signs were there after he was born. Then the Jagannath, because they were living in Jagannath Puri at that time. So the Jagannath cart during the Rath Yatra would come by Bhaktivinoda Thakur's house. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was the magistrate at that time, and the magistrate was something like the mayor. He was in charge of overseeing some part of the Jagannath Puri temple, and therefore the Jagannath cart stopped by his house, and his wife took little Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Bimala Prasad, took him in front of the Jagannath deity, because she was allowed, because she was the magistrate's wife. And at that time, a garland fell from the Lord Jagannath over the little child, which was considered quite nice. Later on, things like one time when he was a small child, 3 or 4 years old, he ate one mango. So his father mildly chastised him because the mango wasn't offered to Krishna, and said, this is not proper, you should only eat things offered to Krishna. So for the rest of his life, whenever he was offered some green mango, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada would refuse it, say, I can't eat this, I'm an offender. So he was quite a strict brahmachari throughout his whole life. In the beginning, when they asked him to get married, or to actually get an education, because he was a scholar, but they wanted to get, he said, no, if I get an education, then they'll expect me to get married. He didn't want to get married. So he refused to get an formal education. In any case, there's a story of his taking initiation. Well, his father gave him initiation to some mantras, like for the mantras for Kurma mantra. But as far as formally accepting Harinam mantra, there's the story of his accepting it from Srila Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, who was supposedly illiterate, which means that, but he was actually, he had full realization of Krishna consciousness, which you can't be illiterate if you know everything perfectly. In any case, externally he appeared to be illiterate because he didn't have a formal education in terms of signing his name and things like that, in the Sanskrit language. So when Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, a Paramahansa, was more or less taking shelter of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, so when it was time for Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada to get initiation, formal initiation, then Bhaktivinoda Thakur said you should take it from Gaur Kishore Das Babaji. So as the story goes, and there's always many stories, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, he went to Gaur Kishore Das Babaji and asked him for initiation. So Gaur Kishore Das Babaji said, I can't give you initiation, I have to ask Chaitanya Mahaprabhu first. He said, come back. So some weeks later, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada came back and asked him again, what did Mahaprabhu said? And Gaur Kishore Das Babaji said, well, I forgot to ask him. Come back later. So he went back to his father and said, well, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji told me that he forgot to ask Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, no, you go back and ask him again. So he went back and asked him. And Gaur Kishore Das Babaji said, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, no, I shouldn't initiate you. He said, you're a great scholar and I'm just an illiterate person. How can I initiate such a personality like you? So Bhaktisiddhanta went back to his father and he said, go back and ask him again. So he went back to Gaur Kishore Das Babaji and said, if you don't initiate me, I'm going to throw myself over the bridge. So he said, all right, I'll initiate you. That's called determination. In any case, Gaur Kishore Das Babaji did not have many disciples, and at his disappearance day, when he disappeared, he wrote a will and he said that the Vaishnavas should take my body and they should drag it through the streets of Navadvip to show what happens with non-Vaishnava. So the Babajis at that time, they wanted to fulfill the desire of Gaur Kishore Das Babaji, because they were not very advanced in Krishna consciousness, some of them. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, who was his disciple, said that actually I have the will of my spiritual master that you can't do this. So he said that, according to how the story goes, he said that if any one of you haven't had sex in the last year, you can take his body. Of course, their standard was, not that they had gross sex, but their standard was that even if you had subtle sex life, then that was considered sex life. So none of them stepped forward. Then, of course, he went down from a year to 6 months to last month to last week. and none of them stepped forward. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada took charge, Gaurakushar Das Babaji, and he was put into samadhi. Of course, there are many other stories of how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, there was a controversy over who was superior, the Vaishnavas or the Brahmins. Bhaktivinoda Thakur is requested to represent the philosophy at a big meeting of scholars. But Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur requested his son, Bhaktisiddhanta, to go and represent the Vaishnavas. So there's a whole book on that, how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada presented, first he glorified the Brahmins, how great they are, and how they're the spiritual masters of the Vana and ashrams, and then he proved by philosophy, by our scriptures, how superior to the Brahmins are the Vaishnavas. Now, Prabhupada writes sometimes about Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, because our whole movement is more or less based upon his vision of how to spread Krishna consciousness in the modern world. So this is from the Nectar of Devotion, chapter, I believe it's chapter 4. Chapter 5, the purity of devotional service. All the previous instructions imparted by Srila Rupa Goswami in this broad statement can be summarized thus: as long as one is materially inclined or desirous of merging into the spiritual effulgence, one cannot enter into the realm of pure devotional service. Next, Rupa Goswami states that devotional service is transcendental to all material considerations, is not limited to any particular country, class, society, or circumstance. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam, devotional service is transcendental and has no cause. Devotional service is executed without any hope for gain and cannot be checked by any material circumstances. It is open for all without any distinction and is the constitutional occupation of the living entities. In the Middle Ages, after the disappearance of Lord Chaitanya's great associate, Lord Nityananda, a class of priestly persons claimed to be the descendants of Nityananda, calling themselves the Goswami caste. They further claimed that the practice and spreading of devotional service belonged only to their particular class, which was known as Nityananda Vangsa. In this way, they exercised their artificial power for some time until Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, the powerful Acharya of the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, completely smashed their idea. There was a great struggle for some time, but it turned out successful, and is now currently and practically established that devotional service is not restricted to a particular class of men. Besides that, anyone who is engaged in devotional service is already of the status of being a high-class brahmana. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's struggle for this movement has come out successful. It is on the basis of his position that anyone can now become a Gaudiya Vaishnava from any part of the world or any part of the universe. Anyone who is a pure Vaishnava is situated transcendentally, and therefore the highest qualification in the material world, namely to be in the mode of goodness, has already been achieved by such a person. Our Krishna consciousness movement in the Western world is based on the above-mentioned proposition of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada, our spiritual master. On his authority, we're reclaiming members from all sections of the Western countries. The so-called Brahmins claim that one who is not born into a Brahmana family cannot receive the sacred thread, cannot become a high-grade Vaishnava. But we do not accept such a theory, because it is not supported by Rupa Goswami, nor by the strength of the various scriptures. So in the bodily concept of life, one may think that unless one is born a Brahmin, then one cannot become a Brahmin. what to speak of a Vaishnava. So this was even when the devotees first went to India, although this was established by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, still there was some, first of all, in India, when the devotees first went there, it was unheard of Westerners being Vaishnavas. It was quite unusual. Generally, the Indians were trying to become Westernized, and they still are. Even if you go to a place like Bombay, it's more Western than West. Everyone's wearing, all the advertisements are girls and boys wearing jeans. They look more like hippies than they do like Indians. But when the devotees first came, no one really took them seriously. They thought that actually they're just hippies imitating. There was even a movie, something dumb, what was that? Take Another Puff.
It's like, it was the hippies chanting Hare Krishna.
Yeah, they made it like the dum buddy rum dum dum or something. They had it when in the early 70s, or maybe 60s, they made a movie in India, and in the movie there were devotees, Western devotees, and they're all smoking marijuana. So they thought that all the devotees, they were just, and that became a very popular song. Dum rummy dum dum rum. Something about take another puff of another smoke of marijuana. And that became what the devotees were identified with, at least some places. Of course, we know that when the devotees came to Gujarat, for instance, then they were very well received. Thousands and thousands of people. For days and days, the devotees went through the Gujarat, Baroda, and what's the biggest city in Gujarat? Baroda, and there's another one. Surat, yeah. And they did Harinam there for weeks at a time, with thousands of people coming out and offering them all garlands and all kinds of things. They had big pandals there. But I remember when we went to Vrindavan at the beginning, people did not really think that devotees were devotees. They got into, some of the locals gave difficulty to the devotees at that time. Some people took them seriously and some didn't, depend. But Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada at his time, especially in places like Vrindavan or Navadvip, the Brahmins didn't like the fact that non-Brahmin, people who were born in non-Brahmin families were given the sacred thread because it spoiled their business. They had a business of having disciples, giving them the sacred thread, and therefore, when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was giving it without having to pay for it to non-Brahmins, they became very disturbed to such an extent that they went to the head of the police and offered him a bribe to assassinate Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. He was quite controversial. The fact that he was giving the sacred thread to non-Brahmins, or actually generally speaking, in the samskar of sacred thread, even the Vaishyas or the Kshatriyas or the Brahmins would receive the sacred thread. But he was giving Brahmin initiation to persons not born in Brahmin families. So luckily the head of the police, he said, well, generally we take bribes for such things, because that's India. You don't get things done unless you give a bribe. Isn't that right? Bakshish. He said, but for saintly persons, I don't do that. In any case, when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada went through on the Harinam down in Vrindavan, in Mathura, then there was conspiracy by the local Brahmins there that they were going to stone the Sankirtan party. They were going to try to kill Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, stoning him to death. But one of his disciples changed clothes with him to get Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada out of there. And the Sankirtan party went on. I think they did throw some rocks at them, but Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada wasn't harmed. So we're in Kali Yuga. In any case, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada initiated tens and thousands of disciples, opened, I forget how many temples in India. He sent his disciples overseas to establish Krishna consciousness. He was very interested in distributing Krishna consciousness in the Western world. He sent his disciples to England, and also they came to India, to Europe, and tried to establish Krishna consciousness. But they were, generally speaking, they were not very much serious. Generally, they went to the higher class people in London and didn't do very much, didn't accomplish very much, but spent a lot of Lakshmi from the Gaudiya Math. They came back without accomplishing very much. Until Prabhupada, well, what happened is after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada's disappearance, then we know that the Gaudiya Math split up. Everyone wanted to become an acharya. And therefore there was fighting more over who would get the land, the properties through the Gaudiya Math, and who would preach. And we know that eventually Prabhupada took up the mission, came to the Western world, and established Krishna consciousness all around the world, based on the teachings of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. Prabhupada said that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was always with me. In other words, he was always guided from within his heart by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada. So that's called the disciple succession. The formal initiation is only to assist that kind of relationship between guru and disciple, that the disciple succession exists by the acharyas living in the hearts of the successive acharyas. And with that potency, one can actually spread Krishna consciousness effectively. Therefore, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada is one of either our grandfather or our great-grandfather, and we honor him today because he lives in this movement, and through his disciple Srila Prabhupada and the sincere followers of Srila Prabhupada, he's effectively continually to spread the movement, the Sankirtan movement, by his conveying the message of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu through this disciple succession. So I'll stop there. Any questions or comments? Yes.
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Maharaj, it is said that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj started this organized mission, and there was also emphasis on distribution of book distribution. How they distributed, in which form in the time of Bhaktisiddhanta they have?
Well, I guess the same way the Srila Prabhupada did. They went somewhere and they offered people to take a book, and they got a donation for it.
Like in the street, or life member, or like... They have books printed, or they
Yeah,
have
they had printed books, of
magazines?
course. They had a printing press. They go out, just like Prabhupada would go out to the tea places and try to sell his magazine there, Back to Godhead. So they had their book stands and they had book stalls, and they had, at the programs especially, they distributed books to try to sell them. Said that when a brahmachari would go out and distribute a few books, when he came back, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada was very pleased, even if only a few books were distributed. I don't think they had a Sankirtan newsletter or anything like that. But if you go to the Gaudiya Mas nowadays, they have so many books there. They're not exactly printed to the high standard that most, of course our books are not always so high standard either, but compared to those, our books are quite high class. I have some of their books. One of the first books I purchased was the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, but they were kept in such bad condition that even I think I still have it. I don't think so. But they were eaten by the worms. They talk about bookworms. There were actually worms that eat books. So so I guess they get transcendental benefit by eating transcendental books. So the book, you can see all the worms going through the book. The bookworms. Well, they had their festival, they had their dioramas, and they had their festivals, and they had, so I guess at those times, they also had book stands. Because that's still quite common in the Gaudiya Math, they have book stands.
They also did Harinams?
Yeah, of course.
Street.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, mostly with old ladies. On the festival days, before the festival days. Even now they do that. They have Naga Sankirtan, and all the old widows come out and they join. Especially in Navadvip. I don't know in Calcutta, because when they first started to do, in most of the streets in Calcutta, the big cities, the devotees first went to go out and do Harinam there, except for like when they first went out in Surat or Gujarat. But in the other places, and people thought they were like these professional Sankirtan groups, because there's a lot of professional Sankirtan groups, especially in Bengal, or even in the cities. And so people start to throw coins at them, because they thought they were a professional music group. So then Prabhupada stopped that. That's when they started the life membership program. Because people took it in the wrong way.
Still there? They are still rather doing other things than
You mean the devotees? They do Rath Yatras there.
Rath Yatras.
Yeah, a lot of Rath Yatras. But I don't, generally speaking, the devotees don't go on Harinam like they do in the West. But book distribution is there. Train stations. Anything else? Kala Grantaraj Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Maha Tirabhava Ki Jai.
ISKCON Spalladhanana Samaharaja Ki Jai. Now we hear Pushpanjali. Millions. Would you like to lead? Pushpanjali? Mamo cvetje.
Okay, we can all repeat. I guess we have some flowers, but I don't. I only have two hands right now. So everyone can repeat. I'm going to say not just one word at a time, or else we'll be here for a long time. I'll repeat a few words at a time. You can all repeat. What's that? Oh, here. Yeah. Om. So everyone, please repeat. Om Jnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksur Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamaya Dadati Swapadantikam Bandeham Shiguro Shiyuta Padakamalam Shigurum Vaishnavam Sha Shirupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Visakans Vidams Cha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Saraswati Tinamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paskatyade Satarane Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Namane Shri Varshavani Devi Daitai Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnanam Dharine Prave Namaha Madhurya Ujvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhaktida Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murtaye Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddha Pisadanta Tvanta Harine Namo Bhakti Namo Gorakasharaya Sakshad Vairagya Murtaye Vipralambar Sambode Padambu Jayate Namaha Namo Bhakti Vinodaya Sachitananda Namine Gora Shakti Surupaya Rupanuga Varayate Gora Virabhava Bhume Swam Nirdesha Sajjana Priyaha Vaishnava Sarvabhauma Jagannathayate Namaha Vanchakalpa Trubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Mahabharanaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Guratvishe Namaha Panchatattva Vakam Krishnam Bhaktas Rupas Rupakam, Bhaktavatara Bhaktyakam, Namami Bhakti Shakti Kam, Jayatam Surato Pangora, Mama Manda Matirgati, Matsaraswapadam Bojo, Radhamadana Mohano. Actually, I skipped one. It says. Divya Vrindarini Kalpa Drumada Srimad Ratnagara Singhasanasto Srimad Radha Shila Govinda Devo Praise Talibi Sevyamane Smarame Srimad Rasara Saramvavi Vangsivata Tatasitaha Karshan Venus Tanirva Karshan Venus Svanir Gopir Gopinatha Shri Estunaha Hey Krishna Karna Sindhu Dinabando Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishubhanu Sutta Devi Pranamami Hare Priye Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasati Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. So now we repeat the mantras for Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada 3 times, and each time we say, have to repeat the mantras, and we go Pushpanjali, and I guess you shower the books with flowers for the marathon. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Ti Namane Shivarshavanavi Devi Daitai Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prave Namaha Madhurya Jvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhakti Da Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Morte Dinatarine Rupanuga Viruddha Abhisidanta Dvanta Harine Pushpanjali Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai. Namo Vishnu Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Ti Namane Shri Varshavanavi Devi Daite Kripabdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prave Namaha Madhurya Jvala Premadya Shri Rupanuka Bhakti Da Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Morte Dinitarine Rupanuga Viruddha Pasadanta Dvanta Harine Pushpanjali. So Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada Thakur Ki Jai. Namo Vishnu Wadaya Krishna Prasthaya Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namaste. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Ti Namane Shivarshavanavi Devi Daite Kripavdaye Krishna Sambandha Vijnana Daine Prave Namaha Madhuryojvala Premadya Shri Rupanuga Bhakti Da Shri Gora Karuna Shakti Vigrahaya Namostute Namaste Gauravani Shri Murti Adina Tarne Rupanuga Viruddha Pisadanta Dvanta Harine Pushpanjali Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada Mahahotsava Tirabhava Ki Jai.
Jai! Haribol! Hare Krishna! Sadashi Guru Shikran Sadashi Prabhupada Gauravan Nirjay Navadi Pushra Bhakti Yoga